This episode is being recorded in a tremendous downpour of rain, which includes all sorts of fantastic shenanigans like hydroplaning, trucks throwing enormous sheets of water across the windshield, and that sort of thing. It's Friday, July 14th, as I record this at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in the year 2023. That gives us just 2 weeks to prepare for RPG A Day 2023. And to help you warm up and get you excited, you can head over to the Nerds RPG Variety Cast for a fantastic contest themed on RPG A Day. That's very cool. We want to thank Jason for taking the time and the interest to think up this contest and execute it. I'm very much looking forward to seeing how people respond, and it's getting me in the mood for August. RPG A Day is in its 10th year, and what did I say about hydroplaning? Ladies and gentlemen, maybe I did get that submarine conversion after all. David and I have been very excited about the idea of this being the 10th anniversary. So if you go to David's blog, which is the Autocratik blog with a K, you'll find all the instructions, all the questions, all the translations, and everything that you need to know about RPG A Day. We will be releasing a video that explains all of that very soon. And there'll be some other things along the way, which we'll talk about later in a separate episode of its own. So, now that we've listened to all of this, what podcast is this anyway? Well, you're listening to the Casting Shadows blog. This is one more bonus episode. Or maybe it's what the podcast has evolved into. A series of Reflections from the Road. Today's episode, or Reflections from the Road by Runeslinger. Well, what is its topic, other than hydroplaning? Its topic is about these layers of play. They get referenced a lot on the podcast and in other places, but we haven't specifically talked about them for the podcast in a format suitable for the podcast. So today is the day, ladies and gentlemen. So earlier this week, on Thursday local time, I had a long discussion with Che Webster of the Roleplay Rescue podcast. And that discussion, which you'll hear in a forthcoming episode, let us range pretty freely through a series of related ideas that we each hold in common, and we wanted to explore that topic based on our different perspectives of these ideas we hold in common. Kind of identify boundaries or different perspectives that could possibly cast it a new light or give an idea a new handle. So we came at it without a lot of discussion of the terms that we were using. We're prepared, I think, in some way for each other's terminology or the way that we tend to think about or talk about role-playing games. I wonder if the rain is so loud, it's drowning me out. I wonder if the rain will be so heavy, it will actually drown me. Stay tuned, dear listener, and we will see what comes of 2023's rainy season from South Korea. But anyway, our topic is layers of play. And during this episode, I will relate them in very general terms to the methodology that Che uses to describe the same phenomenon. And we'll see where we go from there and how useful that is for, coming in as a complete outsider to the conversation that Che and I have in this upcoming episode, and for exploring the back catalog of this podcast. So, without much further ado, let's sally forth into the topic. For the purposes of discussing play, it eventually, at least in my groups, in my culture of play, it became necessary to talk about the influences on how we play. And the way that I found to express this effectively for how I think about and how I experience play and how it seems to be modeled in games where I am a player, or, the player who's the game master, either way, was the idea of layers. Other terms could have been chosen, and maybe we'll go into those in a future podcast, but semantically and in terms of the nuance, a layer felt like a term that I could use most comfortably to explain what I meant. So, meaning, these are things that that support us like the ocean as we are a buoyant vessel on its sea, which is not exactly wrong. These are layers of play. These are influences on play. These are conditions or elements, or aspects of play that we become aware of over time as we become more aware of our play itself. And while I might think of them in a particular order myself, they aren't particularly ordered in my model, in my theory. It doesn't really matter. But the way that you perceive these different influences, these layers, the way that you perceive them, will maybe involve a perception of connection between them. And maybe when you hear how I organize them, that will make sense to you as logical, or maybe you'll want to shuffle things around. And that's fine. That's why it works the way that it works. So, to begin with, the first thing that drew me into the hobby was the idea of playing a character, of creating characters, of exploring imaginary worlds and that sort of thing. To be able to not create a story as seems to be the way that things are described now, but rather to inhabit an imagined world, an imagined space, an imagined territory, an imagined situation, an imagined crisis or conflict or mystery, right? An imaginary life, to be able to step into it and make decisions with some degree of fidelity to that character, right? And so all of this stuff, the idea of running an avatar, you making decisions through the vehicle of the statistics of your character in this imagined game world, this exists to some degree, on the character layer. Your focus is on the decisions that you make as the character, which is how I like to play, or at least for the character in some way. Either for the character like an author might, or for the character like an observer might. They say, that situation's really bad for that character. I hope that this can happen, or I hope that they do this, in the same way that we watch media, and someone decides that they're going to go down into the basement alone, and you're screaming, "Don't go down into the basement alone! Are you an idiot? At least take the shotgun." That kind of stuff. So no matter how we like to interact with the character, there is a layer, and we can find gradations of control of the character, which we'll talk about separately. I think you can get a sense that this exists, right, in this character layer. So I think when we first approach role-playing games, this is one of the aspects of play, this is one of the influences on play with which we get the earliest interactions, right? We learn about system by making a character very often, or someone hands us a pre-generated character, we take a look at where everything is on it, and then someone presents us with the system, or as much of the system as we need to know to get going. So I find in an awful lot of cases, it seems to be a reliable guess that a new player might interact with character first. So here we have the character layer. Now, all of these layers are part of our experience of play. They exist as we get ready to play, they exist as we play, and they exist as we talk about play. So there's this character layer. Next, as you might expect, and by next I just mean relatively adjacent, we're going to start interacting with and being influenced by system, the rules, right? How play is conducted, right? So this is where our culture of play strongly resides, because it also includes, in a very real sense, how we talk about and interact with the main drivers of play. Things like when we need to roll, and what we need to do with the information that a roll provides, or a card pull provides, or how we can even imagine what our character does. Perhaps the game includes things like movement rates, or maybe it rigidly describes action in terms of you can do one movement and you can do one major action, and you can have a number of reactions, and you can have a separate defensive action, something like that. And we come to imagine our character's actions through that filter, right? So we can see how the system layer, the rules layer, can strongly influence the character layer. How many turns do you have per action? Or how many actions do you have per turn, I mean? And how does that compare to other characters in the group? And how does that compare to non-player characters or creatures that you encounter? What do the physical stats represent? How are skills and skill usage determined? Right? How do we even conceive of the character as a concept? Do we come to it trying to put numbers to the idea of a person, or do we come to the idea of a person through the numbers, right? I like this as an example of how the character layer and the rules layer can intersect and can be hard to discern as being separate until you have some experience in play, until you have developed certain preferences more fully, until you've identified certain preferences, that sort of thing. Well, what other layers are there? Well, once we have character and system, then we start getting into what it is that we are describing, which is where the bulk of our conversation comes from, right? And I like to place this layer between system and the player layer. Doesn't necessarily need to be there, though. Here we find genre. Here we find our setting. Here we find our expectations of play. What are we going to do with the system, and what are we going to do with the character that we, as players, will find fun? Right? So I often think of this as the genre layer, but it might be more appropriate to think of it as the world in some cases, or it might be more appropriate to think of it as setting in other cases. And in very limited cases, like a one-shot, it might even be appropriate to think of it as simply the situation that we're in. Right? So far we've identified, or I've tried to share my perception of a character layer, a rules layer or system layer, a genre or setting or situation layer. Then we come to the player layer. This is that aspect or influence on play that is everything that we do. This is us being in a room together, or us using Zoom together. This is us physically interacting with things in the room. This is us not communicating in character. This is not specifically game actions and game dialogue or interactions that are created by and required by a system. Right? The player layer doesn't exclude, to be fair, but doesn't really include the game master saying, roll, right? Or inquiries about how much damage was done, or what a roll result was, and that sort of thing. But how we choose to communicate, how often we choose to interrupt play, what kind of conversations we have had to set up play in the first place, to define what kind of characters can even be chosen, what system we're going to play and how we're going to play it, what rules we include or don't include, deciding to tell a joke or not tell a joke. All of these things exist on the player layer. So you can see how they can blend together. You can see how they have separate influences. You can see how we can approach control over the influence of our play by isolating these particular influences and exerting some decisions upon them, right? Are we going to play our characters as avatars? Are we going to play our characters as a first-person experience, or as a third-person experience, or as I've previously and somewhat cheekily described as the second-person player experience, right? How are we going to express ourselves when we are speaking in character? How is description going to be done, right? Are we going to just roll with it, just relax and play and enjoy being together and tell jokes when the play experience suggests them to us? Are we going to quote Python and Star Wars and Die Hard and whatever else whenever we feel like it? Or are we going to save those jokes for later? Are we going to work together cooperatively to build mood or atmosphere? Are we going to try to facilitate fear? Are we going to try and facilitate humor? Are we going to stop and summon up memories of games past that we shared and enjoyed together and, enhance the nostalgia, enhance our sense of friendship, and really enjoy being together? Or are we going to focus solely and entirely on play for the amount of time that we have scheduled for it? All of these decisions involve one or more of the layers. And our experience of play can, depending on our preferences and depending on our practices, reside in one or more of these layers simultaneously. So because of the awareness that in play we shift a lot, our focus shifts. We step out of character completely. We realize we've been in character completely for a while. We get really interested in the rules. We have a long combat or a long extended task, which slowly drifts out of a high level of description and a high level of in-character immersion, and slowly becomes more of a focus of what it's possible to do with these rules, and to grin and really enjoy the grit and interactions of all the gears turning, of all the separate system elements. We stopped talking in character long ago. We're not exactly just playing as players in a distant sense, recognizing that we're in a room on a chair. We are instead absorbed by how these rules interact with each other. And then, when we get our result, we effortlessly slip back into character, or we hilariously start enjoying and just talking to each other as people, as friends, around the table about what we've just discovered, about what has happened. There's no right way, there's no wrong way. There's just kind of an awareness or a description of what play is. And that's really the function that these layers of play serve. For me as an observer of play, and for me as an aficionado, a researcher, a lover of games. What does this game do? And how does it do it? How does it affect me? What is easier when I'm playing this game than some other game? What is harder? What is the same? What does this game expect will be the default activity? And what will I really have to fight with it to do if I want to do something different than those expectations? That's all part of the exploration. And these layers of play are part of how I can conceive of and communicate all of the stuff. And the rain really wants to drown me out, so let's end this segment. Okay, it hasn't stopped raining, but at least it's not quite as loud. All right, the next, I guess we could say, tool, observational tool that I find helpful in describing play is similar in function to talking about play in terms of stances or intentions or agendas, things like that. When I discovered those, what the Forge was talking about, when I discovered how Ron Edwards built on what the Forge was talking about, and things like that, I found that to be very useful confirmation. It wasn't exactly how I saw things, but I found it really useful as being a much easier way to communicate with people, because they could also go and read an essay or go and read forum posts and see ideas develop and take an agreed upon shape for a community in order to have some discussions about what they were experiencing. Right? So being able to look at that process of how an idea or how an experience is sensed, and how it's later explored, and then later how it's shared, and how that idea gets pinned down by interactions with other people. I think that's one of the great contributions of the Forge. Now, of course, people love to disagree with other people's theories and whatnot. So I haven't put a lot of energy into getting my terms and terminology out there about what I experience, instead reserving it for the people that I actually play with. And those who are familiar with the channel, the blog, and YouTube and whatnot, that has been a recurring theme, that role-playing games, as far as they go, yes, we can think about the larger community, we can think about the larger hobby, but the way that we personally interact with role-playing games is with our group. We can't play with the whole community as a whole, right? We can't have a 1 million player game. Although it'd be interesting to try, I suppose. But the idea is that our culture of play is within our hands, and what we do at our table is the result of our connection and our collaboration. And so ultimately, how we interact with theories of play, how we interact with game master and player advice, how we interact with horror stories and war stories about play, as well as the good stories, how we use products, all of these things in a very real sense. They only have the reality that we give them in play, which is kind of an idea that snuggles up really comfortably with talk about, our imaginations, what people like to call the fiction, right? And how and when and why we might interact with it in a particular way. And so this brings me back to this second tool of observation. So my own preference is for in-character play. So I tend to think of these tools from moving from in-character to out of character. And there are particular layers again, or particular approaches within this spectrum that we can comment on. And I like to have this tool to be somewhat ill-defined, because I don't have everybody's preferences and I don't have everybody's experiences. And one of the things that I like to do as a player, particularly if I'm playing a new game that I don't know if I like yet, or if I'm playing a game that I already have identified doesn't give me, maximal satisfaction, doesn't strike me in all of my preferences in a very satisfying way, but I can find some other way to enjoy playing it. When I'm in those situations, it's kind of nice to be able to try and identify what it is that a person who it was the perfect game for might be registering with or might be resonating with, and how my preferences would strike that person as lacking, right? Trying to mirror my experience or step through into the mirror universe to a reversal, right? What would the me who loves this game and resonates with it on all levels, what would he like and what would he be getting out of this game? That's what I like to try and find. Not only to see if I can stretch myself in some way to enjoy more games and more approaches to play, but also just to understand. And through understanding, be better able to communicate so that I can be heard and can in turn hear what other people are saying. Because so often in this hobby, we say things that make the wrong sense perfectly and seamlessly well. People misunderstand us without knowing it. And it's fascinating. It's also frustrating. So, all of this background context aside, let's get into it. So as I was saying before, I like to think about in-character play. So I start with the in-character ideas. But obviously, we come to the game out of character, and things really start there. But anyway, it's my podcast. Let's humor me, for once. All right, so my favorite approach to play is to play in character, as we talked about earlier, as character. So this gets abbreviated on the written blog as ICAC, right? In character as character. Well, what does that mean? This is what you can hear Che talking about on Roleplay Rescue. This is what you can see a lot of discourse about from the 70s and 80s about play. This is taking on the role of the character. Some groups or some people or some game masters will say you can take this too far, and then you wind up with the gamer trope about it's what my character would do. Now that's a complaint about someone doing something that the group doesn't like for a variety of reasons. The characters wouldn't like it if it happened to them if the characters were real. The players don't like that it happened at all. The players don't think it fits the genre or the setting or the game or the tone. The players have never liked that character being included. It has been damaging their enjoyment of the game, and now that character is doing what that character would do, and they're recognizing, yeah, this is why we didn't want that character to be in the game in the first place. Like, there's so many reasons why it's what my character would do is talked about. However, that complaint is completely independent from the notion of playing your character as if they were real and allowing yourself to enjoy coming to an understanding of that character's personality, that character's environment, and enjoying the capacity as a player of a role-playing game to make decisions for that character, for that person, or for that personality, and the consequences that come as a result, or the rewards that come as a result. So you'll hear people talk about seeing through the character's eyes, or playing as if the character were real, or inhabiting the character, or adopting a persona. There's all of these terms that signify that some part of the enjoyment of the player comes from allowing themselves to focus on the character layer, right? And to have their play, either in the moment or for as much as possible, have their play, their enjoyment of play, result from only what that character is experiencing. They're not thinking about the story, they're not thinking about being able to insert or remove or retcon or alter any of the elements that make up the game world. They simply want to inhabit it. And to get the maximum enjoyment out of this approach to play requires minimizing what is perceived of as intrusions from other layers and other approaches, right? And so people will talk about immersion a lot. Now, what they're meaning by this is immersion in character, right? To be so engaged, to be in a flow state triggered by the imagination of what the character is experiencing from a first-person point of view. So you can see that suddenly asking for a roll, or suddenly having a rules discussion, or suddenly making a Python joke, or whatever, can end this experience. Now, for some people, ending the experience is not a problem. And for others, it is. And for still others, it's somewhere in between, a minor annoyance. Or it's a minor annoyance that becomes more and more of a problem over time as we recognize how important this experience is to us, or becomes less important over time as we recognize how unimportant it is to us. And there's lots of ways to play. This is just one approach to it, in character, as character. So if we have an in character as the character, well, what other ways to be in character are there? Well, there are a number. And like I said before, I like to keep some of them vague, but I've mentioned them already in this episode. We've got things like in character as author. I'm not thinking about manipulating the story as the author might, but I'm viewing the character not through its eyes. I'm viewing it from a third person perspective, as an author might consider the character. What would this character really do? You're deeply, deeply focused on the character. You're just not inhabiting it. And so all of these different perspectives, the author's not the only one, I lump together as in character as observer. Right? So there's in character as that character, and then there's in character. You're only going to make decisions about the character. You're not going to interact with the game world in any other way than to accommodate the actions of the character. However, you're not doing it from a position of inside the character, as the character. You're doing it as someone who is conceiving of or observing the character in some way. Right? So that's the in-character layer, or the in-character approach, sorry. Now, we have talked about, in some of my some of the groups that I get to play with, right? Some of my circles of friends, we have talked about in character as player. And you might think, well, what does that even mean? Well, you could conceive of this as what gets gleefully described as beer and pretzels gaming and that kind of stuff, right? You're not really there playing, let's say, tactically. You're not focused entirely on the rules to the exclusion of all else. You're certainly not focused on the character to the exclusion of all else. You're not focused on story in any way, so you're not looking at the story layer or some other narrative layer that you might, be including because of the game that you're playing. Instead, your primary focus is on role-playing with your friends, right? So if we observe this from the outside, we're going to see witty dialogue. We're going to always have a sense of when what you said was what your character was saying or what you as the player are saying. We're in tune with each other enough, but there's still the willingness to banter where the game master might say, hey, if you say it out loud at the table, your character has said it, kind of thing, and everyone laughs, ha ha ha, well, we're in trouble now. All of this stuff, right? Our tool for play, our enjoyment of play comes from who the characters are and what they do. And we're not making considerations other than that. We're not doing the, wouldn't it be cool if I spent these points to allow for this or to create this NPC or all of those things that shift our focus somewhere else. And so this really encapsulates on an overarching kind of umbrella level, the notions that I see of as the in-character approach to play, right? So 3 easy ones to identify: in-character as observer, and in-character as player. So this brings us to another kind of overview of the out-of-character approach. Right? So obviously we're going to have out-of-character as player. This is when I ask you if you're hungry and you want pizza. If I ask you if you're having a good time. This is pre-play. This is post-play. Right? This is interruptions to play. Right? Focused on the game. Right? Out of the context of the game, you're not the player anymore. You're just you. And I don't need to observe that or label it in any way. But when we are there in, let's say, the game environment, we're setting up, we're tearing down, we are discussing play, we're sitting in a coffee shop at 4 o'clock in the morning getting into game theory or what so-and-so said and did and how the dice behaved and all of that stuff. Then we're having out-of-character enjoyment of the game as ourselves, as the players of that game. I hope that makes sense. And how it has some relevance to the play experience and some influence on it. So out of character as the player. Out of character as the character. Is that something that's possible? Well, yes, however fleeting. What if, right? What if, just for a moment, you need a rules clarification? You're in the grip of imagination. You're an in-character as character player. Most of your enjoyment comes from the character layer. You are deeply invested. You have been having flashes of visual imagination of what the character is doing and where the character is. Maybe you've even been having things like muscle twitches or other bodily reactions to the environment that they're in. Maybe you're connected to the analog of the dice so that when you chuck them across the table, you're imagining smashing some blackguard's teeth out. Maybe you're really in it, but then suddenly, just for a moment, you need a clarification. Are you really coming all the way out? Are you really dropping it? Is immersion in character totally shattered? Maybe. Right? But maybe not. Maybe you have enough practice with the switching that goes on in this game to minimize its impact. Maybe you have such investment in imagining that moment that you can hang on to it while you're desperately trying to multitask. Right? And maybe you're out of character, but your real focus is the character. That sounds a little esoteric. Well, that's what late night game theory-izing can bring about. But we've had some interesting discussions about this particular approach and this particular experience. And so I, for one, am willing to say, I think we can observe this out there in our friends and in ourselves. That's really it for Out of Character, except for Out of Character, again, as observer. I do like it when things mirror, right? So, the Out of Character as the observer. This is the play of the character where the character has never been perceived of as anything other than as a pawn or as something to move about on, or in the imagined world. It's a tool. Maybe it doesn't even have a name. Maybe it's just a pre-gen. Maybe it's just my guy. And that's all we get to. And maybe this is looking at things very, very seriously, but looking at them on the story layer, right? Where the real interest of play is not drawn from the experience of character, but it's drawn from the experience of the developing story, or it's drawn from the experience of presenting the story, right? There was a story before play started, perhaps, right? Perhaps we've gone to that extreme. There's a story before play started, such as we have a prepared module, and we want that adventure. We want to give the experience of that adventure to the players. Not necessarily the in-character experience of that adventure, but how cool the story is, right? We'll often find this in mystery play and or highly tactical play, where we go from one amazing set piece to another amazing set piece with beautifully painted miniatures and backdrops and setting elements on multi-levels and all of this stuff, where the idea of the enjoyment of play is completing it all, getting through to the end and seeing it in its final form, right? This is included also in this Out of Character as observer play. So it could be still play to find out, right? Looking at the tools of the play space, right? The imagined space, as an author might, right? I've got these setting elements. I have these NPC characters that my ostensible character knows, or my troupe of characters knows. And maybe I am responsible for a number of characters, none of whom I inhabit, all of whom I control according to my sense of what's developing on that layer of play where our understanding of past events is informing our expectation and drive toward how we want to shape future events. So I think that's enough for one podcast episode to look at these different approaches, and we talked about the layers first to put those in context. So I hope this is helpful. If there are things that I can expand upon that you'd like to hear more about, please feel free to ask. If there are parts that you have something to contribute, observation, criticism, expansion, whatever, as always, contact me and let's discuss. Let's push on the boundaries of personal observation to find some refined understanding on the other side of that conversation. Anyway, let's end this segment as I'm merging with other hydroplaning traffic, all without having a steering wheel that has any effect. How is he changing lanes? It's amazing. This segment is intended to be brief, and who knows, that could actually happen. What's really interesting is that we're in a section with no rain, so the only thing to hear is normal road noise, and me. Alright, so this segment is intended to very briefly cover the research from the 80s by a researcher by the last name of Fine, who put together a study of role-playing. And his work has definitely filtered down and informed a lot of groups out there who are interested in theories. I've only been exposed to the theories second or third or fourth hand, as I've kind of been waiting to reach a point with my own theorizing where I feel like it's basically done. Like I can't go any farther, and then I want to dip into what other people have seen, so I can kind of independently verify where other gamers' experiences have mirrored my own, or mirrored my observations of other people that I can confirm play differently than I do, that kind of thing. And because it's just for entertainment, it's not something I'm being paid to do as some kind of formal academic research. However, Fine proposes, much along the way that I have proposed layers, proposes frames. And it's one of the things that I've observed over the years is that the terms that we use kind of dictate, in a very real sense, how we can come to think about something. It can kind of lay down track or establish habits or establish boundaries, which may or may not actually cover everything in that topic area, but we self-limit by using some terms. So I personally shied away from using frames in my own theories, except in terms of technique descriptions, such as framing a role. Because to me, and maybe only to me, but it's my theory, frames carry with them a semantic component of a hard boundary. You know, we frame things, we put things in a frame, and we expect them to retain that shape, and we expect them to not go outside the frame, and other things won't come inside the frame, and that sort of thing. And I'm not convinced that I could be satisfied using frame for these observations. So what Fine has put forward in his observations are that there are 3 frames when we are playing a role-playing game. Not a different type of game, but a role-playing game. There being a character frame, right, the role that you are adopting, a rules frame, i.e. the game that you're playing, and then there is the player frame. There's all the interactions that cover being a player. And I find this to be really elegant. You can definitely see how I would recognize my own observations in these observations, but how we want to communicate about them or how we feel about them is in some way different, because I want a word that allows me to feel like the boundaries between these elements are softer, and that the cost between traveling between these different frames is sometimes one that you can reduce, sometimes down to nothing, that you can experience multiple layers at a time as if they were one layer. Whereas this idea of frames, I think, is set up to demonstrate that the whole of your attention can only be in one frame at a time, that you can freely switch between them, but you will only ever be in one at a time, only ever be in one at any given moment. And this may very well be true, right? But as I have come to wrestle with my own experiences and the observations of my experiences, I've also noted changes. Now, one of the things that I have paid attention to as assiduously as I have to role-playing games has been martial arts. And there I've paid attention to a lot more formal studies about things like the flow state or no mind, and how and why and in what ways repetition, and i.e. practice, or sparring a lot, doing exercise a lot, talking about the theory that underpins your martial art a lot, doing forms and other boundary exercises that allow you to combine your thoughts about martial arts with the actions of your martial art, and how over time, as you tread that path toward mastery, the effort it requires to do things seems to diminish. The confusion that arises when trying to combine things seems to diminish, and eventually we become far more efficient at performing very complicated maneuvers that used to be, when we were first introduced to them, they were a series of discrete steps. We viewed them as part one, part two, part three. First do this, then do this, then do this, while doing this, and don't forget to breathe, and step here, and not that way, this way, and all of these things existed as separate instruction sets. But then finally, after enough practice, stopped being the individual movements and postures and muscles and breath that we learned in order to create the maneuver. It just becomes the maneuver. It becomes not the parts, but the sum of the parts. It moves from being 10 discrete things into being one thing, and we don't even really notice the discrete parts anymore. And I find that this has been matched in my roleplay when it comes to which layers can be active. And I feel like in Fine's theories, or his observations here, that the frames aren't set up to describe that they are more useful in representing when we cross the boundary from the character layer into the rules layer. And it's not set up to talk about those moments when the character layer and the rules layer intersect, right? We're dealing with the boundary of these things, so where the character frame stops and the rules frame is brought in, or the player frame is brought in. So I think this is also extremely useful. And I've now reached the point through talking to Che, and by having to have long drives where there's nothing else to think about, having to recognize how valuable it might be at this point to take a look at these thoughts, which are so near or seem to connect in such an important and familiar way to my own. All right, that's the end of this segment, and the rain has started again. All right, so as we come close, but not to the end of this episode, the next segment is for call-ins. Got a couple of call-ins this time, which is very nice. And so without further ado, let's get to our callers. Our first call is from Spencer Freethrow from Keep Off the Borderlands. Very exciting to hear from Spencer. Haven't heard from him for a while. So stop listening to me and start listening to him.
Hello, Anthony. Spencer here. I've just been listening to your episode exploring sandboxes, and really enjoyed that. Some of the things you touched on there regarding improvisational play and the fact that as a GM you can play the world very much as the other players play their characters, and you can have as much fun discovering and uncovering things as the other players are having. And this was something that I touched on with a recent message I sent to Che Webster in response to his conversation with Simon Williams, a conversation you've no doubt listened to yourself. And I spoke about my own experience playing with an improvisational GM, Barney Dicker of Loco Ludus. And while I wouldn't describe that play as sandbox, because the structure of the game is very much us being sent on missions, sent into a particular environment to address a particular problem, the interpretation of what we discover there is very much left for the players to figure out themselves. And the GM is playing out the scenario very much improvisationally. I don't think I covered it quite so eloquently as yourself, but, I was trying to squeeze it into a 3-minute message. So, yes, very much enjoyed that. And then you have posed the question, where did I first hear about sandbox play? Well, I have to say that it wasn't from RPGs. It was before my return to the hobby. It's a term I very much associated with certain style of computer games. Most obvious being the Grand Theft Auto games, where you are presented with a map you can explore however you see fit. Yeah, there are missions and stuff dotted around that map, but generally you can go anywhere and do anything. And that area you're exploring is, to a certain degree, a living world, or at least creating the illusion of such. So it's not a term I initially associated with RPGs, although I think I always appreciated that a living, breathing GM can provide a living, breathing world to a more realistic degree, shall we say, than a computer game ever could. So, yeah, I believe that's where I heard it first. And I think what also informs my awareness of what a sandbox can offer is my initial route into the hobby via text adventures and solo game books. Methods of play where you're constantly being reminded of the absence of tactical infinity.
Spencer, thank you very much for the call. I really appreciate it. Thanks for letting me know your memories of where you heard Sandbox, and I don't think that you're going to be alone in that. I think that for very many people who are not that much younger than me or us, the place where they will have heard it most, or have that term be reinforced, is going to be computer games. And there are a number of people in the computer game industry who all claim to have independently invented the term out of nothing to describe what they do. It's just that I have memories, and I have friends with memories that predates such things. So, But memory is a funny thing, as Jason points out in his call. But I want to thank you again for calling in, because one of these things that these call-ins allow is, just confirmation, that different groups of people playing different games in different times and different places, separated in time and space, can find a way to describe their experiences to each other that allows you to recognize that those disparate groups are having the same experience or having the same reactions to the experience. And I think, That's a magical thing. So thanks for being part of the magic. Our next caller is Jason Connerly, the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Our next call comes from Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast.
Hey Anthony, Jason here. Great discussion of sandboxes on your show. You know, the idea that the preparation you do is preparation for improvisation is a great way to describe what I do when I'm running the game. So I think it was a really useful episode in putting the way I like sandboxes actually into a usable format for other people to understand what we're talking about. So thank you for putting that out there. As for where I first heard the term sandbox, I don't know. Sometimes my younger memories, my older memories are hazy. I can remember some things very well and other things not at all. And I honestly have no clue where I first heard it. You know, I played a lot of role-playing games in the 80s, read even more role-playing games in the 80s, had a subscription to Dragon Magazine, played Chit and Hex War games. I would think probably I heard it then. I know I heard it in the Army. I know, you know, we were at Fort Chaffee in 92 at JRTC, and we were doing table exercises, sandbox exercises. I'm sure the term was used there where we did, you know, various things. Because that was almost set up like your old war games, right? That was almost like a Kriegspiel kind of thing, where you had the different groups in different rooms, and you had you know, the local staff, the cadre, were monitoring what was going on and running it through. It was almost like it was a big war game, right? But it was just the commanders that were there, and like their radio operators, things like that. Really interesting thing that we did. But I'm sure that term was used there. But as far as the modern use in role-playing games, probably when I got back into role-playing games in G+, when G+, you know, we were interacting with G+, early 2000s. I probably came across it before that, but I know I came across it during the G+ days. So I guess I'll say that with the earlier days of the OSR. Okay, that was a long, rambly answer. I am very much looking forward to RPG a Day, and I will talk to you soon.
Jason, thanks so much for those calls. I gotta say that the kind of double-blind command and control exercise you described during your military service sounds amazing. And I don't know if that's the sort of thing that you're up to talking about. I think quite a few of us would like to hear about how that experience worked and your reactions to it as a player under those conditions. But yeah, sandboxes. I mean, clearly the practice and the intention to label it that way and using sand tables as a tool goes back a long, long way. I guess that's what we can say about that. Other people out there, if you have not yet called in with when you heard sandboxes in an RPG context, feel free to call in. The investigation continues. Jason also talked about preparation for improvisation, and I'm glad that resonated with you in some way, Jason. That's really cool. Okay. That closes the call-ins for this episode. All right. If you've made it this far to the absolute end of the episode, well, you have my thanks. And I hope you found something in the episode that is useful, and I really hope that you found something in the episode that you'd like to leave a message about. The information about how you can do that, how you can reach me at SpeakPipe or by mail or through Discord are available in the show notes. Speaking of Discord, we have recently launched a Discord server for any of the Ubiquity role-playing games, which, of course, people will know are very close to my heart. So, if you're new to Ubiquity, or if you're an old hand, you're welcome. And I hope if you're looking for players or just looking to talk about your games or other people's games, that you'll give it a try. And the link to it will also be in the show notes. So, until next time, thank you for listening to the Casting Shadows blog and putting up with all of the road noise from this reflection from the road. Until next time, take care.